You may have noticed that we have been told that open field treatments are very difficult to implement, and all the practices that we've heard so far are about that. So it shows how complex all that is. Jean-François, thank you very much for allowing me to talk about that very important topic for farmers. I would just start saying that there is a real will to use alternatives. I am a farmer myself, and I am well aware of all the challenges on the use of alternatives. I will talk about genuine practices in my farm. I will first introduce my farm, the strategy that I apply, and then I will talk about the alternatives to pesticides. Then I will focus on drum wheat, which is a widespread crop in the south of France. And I will explain the limitations of that crop, that system, and then we will project ourselves within a 10-year perspective. My farm is located in Castelnaudary in the south of France, an area of 125 hectares that can be irrigated. It is very important to stress that, because being able to irrigate allows us to have a diversity of crops. Without irrigation, half of these crops, or 2/3 of the crops listed on the screen, could not be grown. So we have drum wheat, 40 hectares, common wheat, soft wheat for 10 hectares, barley 10 hectares, some legume plants, and some maize, chia. So I really work on that crop diversity, and that allows, as we will see later, to implement biocontrolling systems, and that allows to reduce the use of pesticides. So what is my strategy? I do apply a strategy aiming at sustainable development. So to be consistent with this, I have applied an ISO 14001 certificate. It's a world certification. Just a little number of farms in France are ISO certified, but it's a group. There is a group of people around that certification, and that gives us the instruments and the tools to set indicators. That way we can assess our progress margin. We know if we are on the right track, and then it needs to be implemented in the farm. Then there is an economic aspect, so 125 hectares, diversity of crops. So that means that we need labor for that. We have 4 full-time equivalent workers, and we also use seasonal workers. And the second part, the second key aspect, is the environment. So we try to reduce the number of chemical inputs. So within the framework of that sustainable development strategy, this should be balanced, meaning by this that if the economic aspect is no longer covered, the social aspect will not be covered either, and etc. So we are trying to use these 3 aspects on an equal footing. We are really trying to keep these 3 pillars into consideration at the same time. A big share of the revenue of farmers is calculated on the basis of a price, not on the yield. So there is no lever for prices. We are subject to the world market. So field crops, wheat, barley, the prices are world prices. The same applies for rice. The second leverage, or the second objective of yield, is the yield itself. So the farmers can only work on the yielding aspect. So we will do what needs to be done to increase the yields. So we will look at the different possibilities to use that leverage only. So in my farm, it's 50% on yield and 50% on seeds, and everything is under contract. Everything is written black and white. So we already know the yield and the price of the crop right from the start. So that way we can better anticipate more easily and in a more reliable manner, because we know what we are aiming at. So this is the implementation, deployment of alternative methods. Of course, we want to reduce the use of pesticides. So with a long rotations, with the diversity of crops, that way we can apply alternatives. We can rotate the crops. Then with regard to herbicides, we use the different instruments of hooves, chain arrows. So in some cases, we do not use any herbicides anymore on subcrops. And then functional biodiversity, this is key, as we have realized with some bioaggressors. So melliferous fallowlands, buffer strips on the land, etc. So that way there is a true biodiversity, and we have natural biocultures. So we see that as to the main alternative methods, false seeding, working on the soils with the hooves and chain arrows, and then everything relating to non-controlled diseases. These are fungicides. For the onions, the mildew and botrytis. So these are crops under contract, and something which is allows for the development of the farm is something very difficult to control. So we've talked about tools to help making decisions. For the mildew, for the onion crop, there is a sensor, so a model allowing us to calculate the magnitude of the mildew. So we take the temperature, it depends on the temperature, the wind, the sun, and using that model we can determine whether when it becomes risky, if we do not treat the plant, if we do not spray the plant. We've talked about the plant health scorecard. So there are several ways to act, but with regard to the equipment itself, or for the biocontrol, we don't have many things available to fight these diseases. Well, with regard to the fusariosis of the wheat, fusariosis is a fungi on a drum wheat. The impact may be significant. It will lead to mycotoxins, and then it will be impossible to sell the wheat to consumers. So what can we do about this? How can we fight this? So we need to focus on yield and on the germination, because the production of seeds is also an important criteria. So 15 to 20 quintals about the yield. Well, the weather is key. Climate is important. Mr. Jacquet talked about the difficulty with the IFTs, but what about the climate? A humid year is very complicated for farmers because there is much pressure on diseases. A dry year will make it much easier. Sometimes we do not treat some cereals, some grains, but in a humid year we will have to spray, because otherwise it's impossible, because we need to yield something. We need to get some yield, because this is actually what we live out from. So what about the perspective within 10 years? I think we should focus on the variety. If we want to reduce fungi, the diseases, we need to develop new varieties. We need to develop resisting varieties to some fungi, to some diseases, if we really want to use less fungicides. As to mechanical innovations, where there are robots that are being used through a GPS system. So it's important to focus more indeed on mechanical innovations. And as to the biocontrol, we need to focus on solutions to fight fungi. We need also to reduce the cost per hectare. So if we apply some solutions, these solutions must be widespread and accessible to most farmers. And what we also need is to be acknowledged in what we do by the society. We need recognition by the society. We try to communicate around this to show what we do. So if we go on that track, it shows, well, farmers also need to be recognized by the civil society for what they do. It's a question of philosophy, and it's also to show that we are motivated and we want to move forward. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm ready to answer your questions. Thank you.